Mr. Chair.
Matt Ducey.
Chair, I move that the question be now put.
Now I've got a dilemma. Jan Logie, even though she
Chair,
has had a call previously.
I have previously had a call, and I appreciate
that. There's a couple there that haven't.
Having another one to make points that I haven't heard contributed in this debate. But to start framing my comments in this part of the debate, I would like to just reference the fact that this is a watering down. Even this clause in this part of the Act waters down existing legislation. This isn't just that it's not delivering on the Pike River Mine Royal Commission's recommendations and the following inquiries, recommendations for what we needed to do as a country to ensure that people could come home intact and alive. It is in part actually a watering down even of our existing legislation that is overseeing the death and maiming of so many workers, and that is completely unacceptable to us in the Green Party. So what we've seen happen was an introduction of legislation that we could support, and then it seems after some last-minute lobbying by some employers, we've seen a watering down of the legislation. And I note that there's a nice sculpture in front of Parliament today of the House representing this legislation and the watering down and the melting of that sense of protection for families and workers. Because under today's law, any business, regardless of size, is required to have an employee participation system agreed with its workers, or if their union asks, or if the business has more than 30 workers. Regardless if it's asked. What this does is puts a limit around 20 or more employers. And we had a debate in this House last night when I said that 97% of businesses in New Zealand have fewer than 20 workers. And that was from a report released by the Ministry of Business and Innovation last year. So 97% of businesses in this country have fewer than 20 workers. And this legislation is setting that as the threshold. That is unacceptable. And further, we've heard from, I do want to address some of the statements that were made by a previous member from the National Party side, Alistair Scott, who was suggesting that this really is just legislation catching up with standard practice. Well, if that's the case, how can the compliance costs be too great? If this is the standard practice for most employers, then how can the compliance costs be so great when actually employers, if requested at the moment, are required to have these systems in place? It is a completely weak argument because it is watering down what we have at the moment, and it seems to be actually putting in legislation to meet the needs of the lowest common denominator, the employers that we don't want to be supporting, because we know there are good employers out there. We want our legislation to back them up, to be that threshold that they can go above and be exceptional employers from, but for the base to be their practice, not the practice of the lowest common denominator employers who are not currently listening to their workers. And we've heard some really idealistic views tonight about, well, employers, there's the opportunity for them to participate and tell their employers what they want. I heard from the forestry industry saying that that exists in that industry at the moment, that they're happy with worker participation as it is in that industry at the moment. That is patently not acceptable when we have the level of deaths in the forestry industry that we do at the moment. Much improved in the last 24 months. because of the campaign, and we did not have worker participation in those death reports on the CTU wall. But I also want to point out that there's a concern, and I would like to recommend SOP 105 and 100 specifically, which are to address the fact that in this legislation, workers can elect a health and safety rep, but they can't direct what areas of work those health and safety workers will cover. So you might elect somebody and then they'll be sent to cover a completely, Mr. Chair.
Sarah Dowie.
I move that the